on Christmas Eve, which is a wonderful time. This is if we think of it, not just in a social sense, but in a broader sense, that this is the eve where we're just awaiting the coming of God into physical form. And if we don't think in terms of Jesus and 2,000 years ago, but think right now that all of us are in that frame of mind where we're awaiting the coming of God into our lives. It's a beautiful time of year.
So we're going to start this morning with some chanting and a little bit of meditation, and then we'll share some thoughts with you.
This is a chant that Master used to love to do at this time of year. It's called Cloud-Colored Christ. Words are very simple. It's cloud-colored Christ, come. O my cloud-colored Christ, come. O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, O my Christ, Jesus Christ, come. Get this set up. Let's meditate briefly. Try, especially at this time, to concentrate at the point between the eyebrows, which is the point in the body where the Guru will come to us, whether it's in the form of Jesus or some other great released soul. Concentrate deeply there, and with the magnetism of your love and your concentration, draw them to you.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Well, we wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. Since we only have 45 minutes with you together this morning, or this evening for you, we'll begin sharing some thoughts. And first of all, I want to say we're looking forward to returning to India in February and in March, and we'll see many of you during that time period. So we're very much looking forward to it. It's been wonderful coming back to America to see family and friends here, but you are also our family and friends, and we are missing you. So what we'll be sharing with you today is about how to awaken the Christ consciousness within. This was a very important aspect of Master's teachings. Yesterday here at Ananda Village, we had, honoring the tradition that Guruji started, we had our long meditation on the 23rd of December, and it was wonderful. We meditated from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon with chanting and listening to music by Swamiji, and there's really no substitute for deep, longer meditations to help you go find God within yourself, to find the Christ consciousness within. But first, you may all know this, but share a bit of Master's teachings about what is the Christ consciousness. And we need to understand that in the West, most people are raised in the Christian faith, but the Christ consciousness far transcends any religion, any faith, any set of beliefs. It's a universal principle that is present in all creation. In fact, Master said that the Trinity that we find in India, the Om Tat Sat, is its parallel in this concept of Christ consciousness. The Sat is God's consciousness beyond creation. If none of this world, this illusory world existed, that Sat, the silent, watchful presence of God beyond creation, would exist eternally, does exist eternally. And then there's the Om, the holy vibration. And when God decides to bring this world into manifestation, He does it through the vibratory flow of energy, the Om. And that's God's consciousness put in motion, in a dynamic state, one might say. But then He goes the next step, and this is the Tat, or the Christ consciousness. And that is the intelligent, divine consciousness present in every atom of creation. And this is the Christ consciousness. This is, one might say, when one watches a movie, one thinks of what was the director what quality was he trying to convey to the audience? Well, one looks at this world, and particularly at the saints that are closer to the divine consciousness, what quality is God trying to show us that will bring us closer to them? And these are the qualities we find in the Christ consciousness. Jesus was a human being that was born. He was an avatar, just as all of our line of masters are, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, and Gurudeva. But he was resonant with this Christ consciousness. So there's Jesus the man, and then there's the consciousness of Christ. In India it is called the Kutastha Chaitanya, our Krishna consciousness. And so we need to understand that this consciousness is not east or west, it's universal. And Master called his mission, which he came to the West, but really it's a global mission. He called it the second coming of Christ. And what that refers to, Christ says in the words that are quoted in the Bible. You know, I was rereading the Bible recently in preparation for classes and programs we were needing to do here. And the Christian Bible, the life of Jesus, is just 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the whole of the Bible is much longer, and it has the Old Testament and then the New Testament and other things. But the 4 books of the Bible relating to Christ's life are really very, very short. Very little is said about his life, and we have a lot of his words fortunately quoted, but I was just looking at, maybe it was 100 pages, and I just thought, my goodness, the impact that the life of that one soul has had, particularly in the West, when there's so little on a physical level we can draw on that would change the lives of so many people. But really what this indicates is the power of a God-realized soul to change lives down through history. And so it is with all of our line of gurus. Babaji Lahiri, harbingers of Kriya Yoga, Sri Yukteswar, training the emissary Yoganandaji to come to the West in this time of Dwapara Yuga. But in these 4 books of the Bible, Christ mentions at the end of his life that he will come again and he will appear in the clouds. And really people, fundamental Christians, think that means that the man Jesus will appear in the clouds and people will see him. But that's why we chanted that chant at the beginning, Cloud-Colored Christ, because what Master was really saying was that the Christ consciousness will emerge from the clouds of unfocused minds, and then the more we focus on God, the more we meditate and pray and try to tune in, the more that that image of the cloud-colored Christ appears, and that is the second coming of Christ, when he is born anew within all of us, whatever faith we've been raised in. Again, I want to emphasize that because it's part of Master's mission. He called it the second coming of Christ, but he also, one of his main tenets of his mission was to show that the underlying truths in all world religions, true world religions, are the same. There isn't a difference. There's one God, and all religions are different expressions of that same one truth. And so what are the qualities that Jesus demonstrated in his life, that our line of gurus demonstrated in our life? Because this is one way that in our daily life we can emulate this consciousness. Well, in the life of Christ, it was a beautiful life, not an easy life, but a beautiful life. And you know, he was born, most of you probably have heard the story of being born in the time of Roman oppression, and having his parents had to flee to Egypt because of the oppression, and then returning. He was raised by a very holy and devout family and showed great depth and spirituality even as a young boy. But then at the age of 15, in these little books of the Bible, there's no mention of Jesus. And he reappears again 15 years later at the age of 30 and begins his public mission. But you know, the question arises in thoughtful people, well, what happened in those 15 years? And there's more and more evidence, and Master tells us as well that in those 15 years, Christ returned to India, returning the visit of the 3 wise men, who, as Master tells us, were Babaji Lahiri and Swami Sri Yukteswar. And so he went to India and Tibet, and he studied in those sacred places, and then returned at the age of 30. And in those last 3 years of his life, he demonstrated such a beautiful life, qualities of deep humility. he was mocked, he was rejected by the people that he came to help, but there was always that underlying compassion, knowing that what he had to offer them was the key they were all looking for their own happiness. So compassion and forgiveness. And so I was meditating on the life, different episodes in Christ's life, and I was just really baffled that one such as he would have to endure something as horrible as the torture of whipping and mocking and then finally crucifixion. But Master said the greatest demonstration of love were his words, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And so that ability to forgive all, no matter what they do, just they know not what they do. And so that deep forgiveness, and each one of us every day have to deal with misunderstandings and feeling slighted and so forth and so on. But if we can just have that same forbearance and non-self-involvement that Christ had as they crucified him, then we begin to awaken that Christ consciousness within. And other qualities that we can emulate in our life is great generosity in spirit, to just give and give, no matter if we receive back in return. Sometimes people ask us the question, well, what if I love and give and it's not reciprocated? Loving and giving are their own reward. If we think to give to others and they never remember to give back to us, yes, it hurts a bit, but we just need to transcend that and to think, my life is not about what I receive, but it's about what I give. And the beautiful Sermon on the Mount, where Christ, if you're not familiar with it, it's well worth reading. And Swami Kriyananda wrote a beautiful little book. I don't know if it's available in India, on the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are what Christ delivered in the Sermon on the Mount. And in that he says, and Swami goes into a deeper yogic explanation of what that really means. And it's such beautiful, beautiful statements. Blessed of the pure at heart, for they shall see God. And Swami explains that when our mind is focused in deep meditation and our hearts are given to God, then he'll come to us. Blessed are the poor of spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. And so when we're not thinking, what am I getting for myself? What am I getting for myself? Then everything that we need is given to us. May not be everything we want, because desires can outstrip needs, but everything we truly need that God sees as a real need is given to us. And again, in the Beatitudes, Christ says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And those who try to create harmony and peace in this world, they are emissaries of God. And so there are many ways in our daily life that we can emulate these great ones whose lives we worship and so admire. And of course from Master's life and the life of all of our gurus, there are many beautiful stories as well. But we need to see that in our daily life, with our attitudes, with our behavior, we can also draw the Christ consciousness within. This is a story that I've shared before, but it was a very important story in my life that happened some years ago here at Ananda Village. And another woman and I were working on a big mailing project at Christmas. We were sending out greetings. This was in the days before emails and computers, if one can imagine such a time. And we were sending out a physical mailing to all of our mailing lists with Christmas greetings from Swamiji and a nice pictures and so forth. It was a big, big project. There were many thousands of names, and we knew it would be many days of work. And in the middle of the project, this other woman and I, as I say, were working on it. Swamiji pulled up and in a car with a few other people with him, and he said, "I'm leaving to go down to Los Angeles to do some programs there. And then after we do some programs and classes, we're going to have a little vacation and we'll go to Disneyland. And there's room in the car for one of you. Which one of you would like to come?" And we looked at each other, and the choice was staying and finishing the mailing all by ourselves or going on a wonderful trip with Swami. And I looked at this other woman, and I knew, I can't even explain very well what it was I knew, but I knew that I had the strength to say, "You go," and she didn't. And so I said, "You go, I'll stay and finish." And she went and got her bag and they took off. And then that night, after meditating, I went to sleep. And I had a dream, one might say a vision of Christ. And it was from the cross. But it was like I was up there with him, looking down at all the people. And I heard his words, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I knew that that was my gift, that the trip to with Swamiji was no doubt a great blessing, but by having the consciousness where I thought not of my own needs, but of the needs of someone else before myself, Christ came to me in that way. So when we can live in this spirit, then we begin to feel that Christ consciousness within us. And when we do, there is such joy, such freedom, such blessedness, and then finally the most effective way to awaken the Christ consciousness within, of course, is through deep meditation, and to concentrate at the spiritual eye, at the Kutasla Chaitanya, where the Christ consciousness dwells within each one of us. And so, dear friends, we're so happy to share these thoughts with you. Jyotish will now speak and share his thoughts, but we send our blessings to you today and always, and hope that your own divine nature may come forth ever more strongly.
So I'll share a few words also, partly to help us tune into Jesus as an expression of God, and partly to show how Jesus was very, very much a yogi. After all, as Devi was saying, he went to India and studied presumably with the great masters Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya and Sri Yukteswar, or other great masters, and absorbed the teachings of India, and then came back and presented them in a slightly different language, because his mission was to the people and the place of his time in Jerusalem, the Jews. And then that message, in that form, spread around the world. But these great masters of the various religions always speak basically the same truth. There's only one truth, and they may express it slightly differently, but the truth itself is the same. That's partly why Master said that part of his mission was to show that the original teachings of Krishna as taught in the Gita and the original teachings of Christ as shown in the Bible were one and the same teachings. And he was trying to demonstrate that, show that, and break down these artificial barriers that people put up and say that my religion is different from your religion, and worse, my religion is better than your religion, and then even terribly, my religion is so right that I'm going to punish you if you don't believe the way that I believe. And it creates so much difficulty in this world. But these great ones come, and they basically lead lives that are very, very similar. And the lives of Krishna and the lives of Jesus, although of course outwardly somewhat different, because they lived at slightly different times and slightly different in different areas of the world, nonetheless, they have the same central qualities. So let me talk a little bit about the life of Christ as a yogi. You know, in the teachings of yoga, we're taught that there are basically 4 major paths of yoga. There's bhakti yoga, there's jnana yoga. Bhakti is the yoga of love and devotion. Jnana yoga is the discriminative yoga. There's seva or karma yoga, where we serve God, and then there's Raja Yoga, which is a combination of all of those, but most especially with meditation at its core. Well, we might think, oh, well, this is kind of esoteric knowledge and I have to memorize these different yogas, but they're just expressions of who we are as human beings. We have feelings, and if those feelings, especially the purified feelings of the heart, that then become devotion, if that's turned toward God, that becomes a valid pathway that takes us to God. We have activity that we do in our lives, and if that activity becomes completely selfless, completely focused on just doing what's right to be done, and especially in helping others, then that becomes a pathway to union with God, or a pathway to yoga, which is the word that means union with God. We have thoughts, we have a discriminating mind, and if we use the discrimination of the mind to look beneath the surface of appearances and see what truly is, then we begin to see more and more that this universe is made up of consciousness. Not this, not that. Finally, all it remains is consciousness. And then, especially meditation, uses the teachings of the withdrawal of life force and the focusing of prana in order to achieve these higher states. And so these great masters come into the world, and they demonstrate in their own way these 4 qualities. And certainly Christ did that as a complete yogi. Let me just start with, as I mentioned, first I mentioned Bhakti Yoga. Christ was so much of a bhakti. He said that thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. But he said love because he's really meaning that we should turn these qualities, which are, again, a repetition of these 4 paths of yoga, that we should turn that toward God. In fact, one of the teachings of both Master and Swamiji is that Christ came to bring love, and love of people, love of God, back into religion. That the religion of the Jews at that time, which came from Moses and came with the laws or the 10 Commandments, had become too focused on law, too focused on regulation. And that regulation came to be kind of hair-splitting, and it was dominating people. And when Christ, for instance, he and his followers ate some corn on the Sabbath, which is in the Jewish religion on Saturday, and you're not supposed to eat on the Sabbath, and they accused him. And he just returned the thought that it is not what you eat that makes you unholy, but it's not what goes in the mouth that makes you unholy, but what comes out of your mouth that makes you unholy. He said again that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Always turning it back into compassion and love. In many instances, there was, according to Jewish law, there was a woman who had been accused of adultery, and they were about to stone her to death, which, according to the Jewish law, was the right thing to do. And Christ didn't say, you can't do that, you must experience love, you must do this, you must do that. He simply said to this crowd of angry people who with rocks in their hands, he said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Meaning all of us make mistakes. All of us have problems. Why condemn other people? Because they too have problems. And then when that finally dispersed this crowd, he went with great compassion to this woman and said, go and sin no more. So he forgave her. And of course he forgave her. God always forgives us our sin, which is simply error, simply ignorance, and the actions out of ignorance. So Christ showed great love. All his actions stemmed from love of God first of all, but then that love expressed to other people. He expressed constant service. You know, he and his group of followers, typically we think of them as being the 12 disciples. In Indian terms, they probably would have been called wandering sadhus, because he was the teacher. They just wandered, they had no place to live. He said, the birds of the air have their nests, the foxes have their holes, but the Son of Man hath no place to lay his head. Meaning that he was just wandering, and all this world was his home. But none of the places was his home in particular, excluding all other places. And so he and his band just wandered from place to place. And while he was wandering, he was constantly doing good works. He was helping people. He cured the blind, gave them sight. He cured the lame, allowed them to walk. He even raised someone from the dead. Again, these same yogic powers are demonstrated by many, many great yogis. He walked on water. That too is a yogic power, demonstrated by many Indian saints. And so the same things that Jesus did, others have done. But the fact that he did them at a time in a place where it demonstrated his divinity is very, very important, because it's not that it allows people to say, oh, Jesus, he was special. It allows people to say, oh, Jesus, he was special. I'd better listen to what he had to say. And in the Bible he says, without miracles, people don't have faith. And so he did these miracles not to show how special he was, but to help people have faith so that they would actually listen to his teachings. And as Devi said, his teachings are so beautiful. His teachings are, among other things, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. And I would very much recommend that you can go on the internet and just type in Sermon on the Mount, and you will get those beautiful words of his. Some years ago, Devi Ji and I led a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, to Israel. And we went to the place, they have a chapel, and went to the place where that sermon took place. And there we heard a kind of murmuring voice from outside the chapel in different areas of a beautiful garden that had been created. And then as we listened, we realized that in different tongues, because people came from many, many different nations, And then they would read the words that Jesus said, but they would read it in Japanese or Korean or English or French or German or probably in Hindi. And they would read it in their own language. And so that Sermon on the Mount had been repeated and repeated over years, perhaps centuries, at that spot. So that energy that went out from Jesus, his teachings, have gone out like a pulse, like a wave, and it's covered the whole of the earth, and it's uplifted the consciousness, especially to those who tune in to him. He said again, where two or more are gathered together in my name, there shall I be in the midst of them. And so when we gather together and tune in, especially, it doesn't matter quite so much that we tune into Jesus, but tune into his message, tune into the Christ consciousness. And when two or more are gathered together, just as in this very instant, we are gathered together in the midst of calling on Jesus, so he is fulfilling his promise. He is in the midst of us. He is here using his attunement with God to uplift our consciousness and to bring us a little closer to God. And constantly was Jesus serving people. He used his mind to discriminate between the right and the wrong, to constantly say that only God is real, only God exists. And there are many, many statements of wisdom. And then finally, he was truly a yogi. In his terminology, he generally called it more prayer. But obviously, prayer, Master explained, prayer is a little bit like us mentally or emotionally speaking our needs to God. God, please help me with this. Please give me this. Please. And it's us letting God know of our needs. Master said that we should not do that as beggars. We should do that with the knowledge that we're children of God and that he already knows what we need more than we know what we need. Nonetheless, turning our minds toward him will allow him to see that we're focused on him, because it's really, he's already within us. He's already made the connection. It's we who have to make that connection. And so by turning our consciousness toward him, then we make that connection, and one could say complete the circuit. And by us opening ourselves to him, then he is able to respond and send his energy to us. As the great Saint Anandamoyi Ma told me when I visited her, I asked her to bless some beads and so on. And she said, why ask this body to bless these things? Don't you see that God's blessings are always pouring down? She said that God is like the sunlight, and all which constantly pours down. And all we have to do is open the shutters of the windows, and that sunlight comes into our darkened room. Well, prayer is the opening of the shutters. We open ourselves to God. And when we do that, God comes in. And so all of these teachings, deep, deep yogic teachings, were the message that Christ brought to his disciples that were then put into the Bible and have been read and used to uplift and change the consciousness of mankind for over 2,000 years. It is a great, great blessing that this avatar came into the earth, onto the earth. And it is this time of Christmas especially when we tune in to that teaching and that great, great soul and receive to ourselves not just the teachings, but the grace and the blessings that come with them. And so Devi and I also want to give you our deep love and our deep wishes for your uplifting consciousness, and that you might do what Christ recommended. Don't look to him only as an object of worship, but try to emulate everything that he did in your own life. So, as one of Master's favorite books was called The Imitation of Christ, let all of us live in the imitation of Christ. God bless you, and Merry Christmas.